Well, Mike, thank you for taking the time sitting down with us. I appreciate it. We'll be talking a little bit about the situation in the U.S. politics after the midterms is now over. Where do you see American politics now as we are coming to an end of 2018 right now?
Well, I think the probably the most important underlying dynamic in this election was the way in which our demographic groups in America sort of splitting out in a much more perfect way. It used to be the Democratic Party in Congress did very, very well among the elites, people with the highest levels of income and the highest levels of education, and people who are at the bottom end of those measures, so people who are more the underclass in our society. And they didn't do very well with people in the middle. And in terms of constituencies, the Democrats owned districts that had a lot of the top and a lot of the bottom of those measures. The Republicans dominated in the middle, and even in terms of occupation. So they had a lot of success in areas with a lot of manufacturing employment, the blue-collar type jobs, that sort of thing. People who served in the military, when you had heavy concentrations of military constituents, Republicans did very, very well. Democrats not at all. What happened on Tuesday is that the extent to which there had been a firewall for Republicans among elites, there were districts that had a lot of wealthy people, a lot of postgraduate training and education in the household, and high home values in their districts, and also a lot of people in the middle, but not poor. Those districts went to the Democrats for the first time. So now you have no firewall. Anywhere there's a heavy concentration of elites in America anymore, you pretty much have a Democrat in Congress representing them. In the Senate races, it was along those lines as well. States with an overall lower profile in those regards, Missouri and North Dakota, Indiana, they went to the Republicans. They sort of sorted themselves out in that regard. And some states where you have more affluent constituencies, even Nevada has a bit more of that now, and also the Latino vote in both Arizona and Nevada, they went back to the Democrats. So what you have now is essentially you've sort of upended the old traditional understanding of what the parties wanted to say about each other. And the Democrats always have wanted to say, we're the party of the people, and the Republicans are the party of the rich. And the Republicans always were trying to shed the country club image, that they were just a party of really rich people who had 3 martini lunches and took expensive vacations and that sort of thing. Well, right now, there's nothing could be further from the truth. And the way that the parties try to play out that narrative is by talking about policy. So a Republican tax plan to cut taxes will disproportionately help people at the high end because just in terms of raw dollars, they'll get a bigger tax cut. So the Democrats harp upon that and say, yeah, there, you see it? They're still the party of the rich, even though they may not represent them anymore. And the Republicans are trying to say, look, we're really for the working guy, and we're doing very, very well in areas with a lot of extractive industries like mining and oil and gas production, that sort of thing, and a lot of people who work in factories. So the manufacturing boom in America, I think there's been 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 jobs created in the last year and a half in manufacturing. They're very proud of that, and they talk about that. So the parties are realigned in their self-image and how they try to communicate that to the American voter. And I thought that was the most important, broad, 30,000-foot dynamic coming out of the elections.
We have now a split Congress once again, from what we've seen previously in terms of a split Congress, that means welcome back dysfunctionality, no sign of bipartisan collaboration in any ways. Do you see any signs at all that is going to change with the next split Congress that we'll see from the beginning of 2019?
For the most part, no. But there are always issues where if the divide is more regional, let's say, in nature, like a bill that we have a very bad infrastructure, or roads or highways or bridges, really in dire need of upkeep and repair, and even some new ones being built. And that part might bring people together from both parties around a common goal of, look, we're in New Jersey, we're in Massachusetts, or we're in Indiana. We need to help along these lines and create a big proposal that would parcel out money for that kind of stuff, that kind of infrastructure improvement across the board. But even there, what you run into is the Democrats are still joined at the hip with a lot of trade unions. So they might say, well, we want to build the roads and the bridges and the tunnels, but we really want to make it so that the union workers get a very, very good deal, and it may cost more money than the Republicans want to spend. But for the most part, the things that will end up passing will only be if they can hitch a ride, legislatively speaking, in a bill that has to pass. That if it doesn't pass, something dire happens. The government shuts down. We breached our debt ceiling, so we can't issue additional debt. And we're issuing debt, $1 trillion a year more right now. So that those are the things that everything will become like magnetic. They become a magnetic force for anything viable, any other provision that otherwise might not pass. One thing that will happen, I can guarantee you, there'll be a lot of judges confirmed in the Senate. That's one thing. It's entirely within control of a majority, a simple majority now in the U.S. Senate. That had been, in the past, required a supermajority vote of 60 out of 100 senators. No more. It's now just 50, really 50, because you can get Mike Pence, the vice president, who's also the president of the Senate. He casts the deciding vote if you just have 50. And now, with Florida having been called the other day, last night, and Mississippi likely to go Republican, you're looking at 53 votes. So that's for Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader. That's a lot of leeway for him. He can get a lot of judges through in very quick order. And there's 40 some odd openings that have to be filled, and that can go through early next year. Those judges.
Let's have a look at the situation in the House. You previously worked as Kevin McCarthy's policy director. He's now the leader of the Republican minority after Paul Ryan is leaving American politics. If you were still working with him, what would be your advice, and how do you expect him to approach this new position of being the minority leader instead of the majority?
I mean, I think the number one challenge for this minority incoming is to stand for something clear. So have an agenda that's readily understood, that's attractive, that fills a need that's not being met right now in American life, and say, this is what we stand for. And if you give us back the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, we will focus religiously on accomplishing these 2 or 3 or 4 goals. You don't want to have too many of them, but you want to talk about the economy in ways that bring people in. Republicans were very, very, for some reason, not very good or not very diligent in speaking about the economic recovery that has been a lot better than it had been in the last 7 or 8 years. The unemployment rate has stayed low. The incomes have gone up more quickly. The overall, GDP, general economic growth, is pushing over 3%. Really, since Trump's been in office, it's been about a 3.3% average gain per quarter if you take out the very, very first quarter in 2017. But since then, 6 quarters in a row has been pretty good. And it had never been anything like that since the big, great economic meltdown about a decade ago. So they have to do a better job of saying, look, we've done these things to help promote economic growth. We want to continue to do more. We have a list of 4 or 5 things in economic growth that we believe in. They'll be our priority, and we'll make that H.R. 1, meaning the first bill introduced in the House. It's very symbolic of what a party that's the majority party stands for. Our H.R. 1 will have these items. And they need to sit down and figure that out, because the last few years they really have they did a good job on the tax bill. The executive branch through Trump has done a good job of looking at regulations that are costly and not cost benefit wise, not helpful, and changing those. The judges have been good, but for the most part, the average voter didn't go into the voter booth saying, I know what the Republicans stand for, and I know what the Democrats stand for, and all things being equal, I favor the Republicans over the Democrats. That didn't happen anywhere near as much as McCarthy would have liked, and I think that'll be his focus. He's not going to be the one to come up with those ideas himself, but he's really good at convening people and identifying the leaders within his own caucus who will do that.
Yeah, because I was about to ask you that. There was a lot of talk before the midterm election about whether or not Kevin McCarthy would have a united Republican Party behind him, or whether or not Steve Scalise were the more likely leader for the House group in the future. Do you see it being a united party behind Kevin McCarthy's leadership now? Has he finally made it out with with the Freedom Caucus, or where do you see the situation right now?
Well, I think the key thing to answer that is to just draw a distinction between being in the majority and the minority. It's easier to do what you're talking about when you're in the minority, because mostly what you're doing is you're reacting to whatever the majority Democrats are going to be putting forth on the table. And right now, the things that their base are talking about doing are very ambitious. They're now talking about zero carbon emission economy. It's zero fossil fuels. I mean, that's a big change from the current status quo. They want to make education free at the higher education level, and they want to make healthcare free for everybody through Medicare for All proposal. Those three things in and of themselves would fundamentally transform our understanding of what the relationship is between the federal government and the ordinary American constituent, voter. So they're going to have a target-rich environment to say, this is what the majority party now stands for. We don't believe in that. We stand for something different. Healthcare, they've been famously incapable of coalescing around an alternative vision for what the healthcare system should look like. They've been really good over the years at defining what they don't like. They all agree on that. If they don't agree on an alternative, that has to change. That maybe finally, after it's been over 20 years of them, I've been in the middle of this for a long time, and so for some reason on the right of center, the healthcare experts don't play well together, and they tend to agree on the first couple levels of policy, and then when they start getting into more detail, everyone becomes, goes in their own direction, and that has to change. But I do think they can find, especially with these the new kind of political base of the Republican Party, it may make tax policy a little easier too, because what they can do is they don't have to worry about as much as they used to the constituencies that want to protect things in the tax code. So the irony is that if they want to further limit the deductibility of state and local taxes, or if they want to further attack some of the really, really big tax exclusions, the special interest provisions in the tax code that are very popular among the wealthy, they have politically a much easier task in front of them because they no longer represent those voters. The Democrats are going to worry about protecting all these special interest provisions, even as they're yelling at the Republicans of being the party of the rich. It's going to be a really odd rhetorical environment going forward. And the Republicans can do tax policy from the bottom up, and they have the liberty now to say, we want to get rid of these big special interest provisions, raise revenue from doing that, and then take that revenue and give it back to the voters and constituents through bottom-up changes. Make the standard deduction, the zero bracket amount, where no one pays the first amount of taxes, higher than it is right now. We want to lower the tax rates, and maybe the tax rates they lower are on people below $200,000 of income. Okay, it used to be they wanted to do just the top rates and take the top rate down. Well, right now, the members of Congress who represent the people who are most likely to pay that top rate, the very rich, all have not just Democrats representing them, but oftentimes the most liberal Democrats. So the Democrats are in an odd policy position because in order for them to hold up their end of the rhetorical bargain about what they stand for, who they represent, they're going to have to do things that will be very painful for large swatches of their own base and their fundraising base. So we'll see what happens on that front.
Final question, Mike. Do you see the strategy that Kevin McCarthy will approach now as a strategy of taking back the majority again in 2020, or do you see it has a longer perspective?
Oh, no, 2020 will be the big year, because when you have a presidential level election, you want there to be a dynamic that trickles down to everybody. And you want the re-election campaign of Trump to be structured and framed in ways that will help candidates that are running as Republicans. And it's worth mentioning, too, that what really we've also seen is the Republican Party now is firmly Trump's party, so that there's 85 to 90% easy in every poll of Republicans are now saying nice things about Trump. It wasn't like that initially. It was more in the high 70s and low 80s. Now you're up 90, 92%, and sometimes even higher than that. And the Democratic Party is fully on board with the kind of things that the base is talking about there. So what the Republicans went through a few years back when we shut down the federal government over It's this misguided notion that the House majority alone at the time could repeal the Affordable Care Act, and otherwise known as Obamacare. The Democrats have their own version of that now. They're going to have their own version of a Freedom Caucus, which is the most right-wing grouping of members in the House. They're going to have a new, I'm guaranteeing this, some kind of new caucus formed of the most left-wing Democrats who are going to agitate, maybe protest in front of Speaker Pelosi's office and say, we want you to bring Medicare for all to the floor. We want you to commit to a zero carbon economy by the year 2020 or 30 or whatever. That kind of agitation, especially when they communicate to their own base that this is plausible, feasible, and if you're not hearing officials in Washington echo this, they really are against you. And the people will hear that at the grassroots level and say, what do we do? And that's going to create all kinds of cross pressures on the Democratic majority if they try to move their agenda forward. So, there's going to be some really interesting times. Anytime there's a sorting of the political coalitions the way we've just seen, you have the most interesting times in politics.
We certainly are living in interesting times in American politics right now. Mike, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.